All right, this is a bit of a ride, so hang in there with me. This all went down about 2 weeks ago, and my whole world has shifted from complete trust in her to serious doubts. My wife and I first crossed paths when I was just 19, and we quickly fell head over heels. She already had a baby, just 4 months old, from a past relationship, and the baby's father had been out of the picture as long as I've known her. Since childhood, I've dreamed of becoming a father myself, but due to a genetic disorder I don't want to pass on, adoption seemed like the perfect path for me. So that's what we did, and life went on like any typical family. We tied the knot last year. Her family was never really tight-knit, but she did have a couple of cousins she was relatively close to. I enjoyed getting to know them. They seemed like good folks. She did share a story about one of them, let's call him Jake, who when they were about 12 and 13, tried to kiss her, but she managed to escape. I asked if she ever talked to anyone about it, and she said she just wrote it off as him being a foolish kid. We see Jake every Christmas, and he seems like a regular guy. I actually liked him because he's down to earth, unlike her other family members who are also uptight. Lately, she's been reconnecting with her cousins and attending a few family gatherings. We only have one car, so Jake has been giving her rides to these events since I needed the car for work. Everything seemed fine to me. They're family, after all. Her behavior didn't change noticeably. However, one night while I was watching TV, she came in and mentioned that I had accepted a friend request from a woman at my job. We're pretty open about things. For example, she often makes comments about attractive men, and I don't mind telling her when I find a new colleague appealing. She didn't accuse me of cheating, but there was a vibe that she might be hinting at it, which was unusual. I mention this because I've read that sometimes cheaters project their guilt onto their partners. Anyway, these family gatherings were genuine. The entire family posts pictures on Facebook, and my wife sends me updates from the events. After 2 of these outings, she came home acting distant and robotic. Our sex life seemed normal, though quieter than usual. She suffers from depression, which often makes her withdraw, and she attributed her behavior to that when I asked her if she was okay. So 2 weeks ago, while she was at work and I was off, I was puttering around the house, dropping the kid off at school and checking my email. I saw a message from her cousin on Facebook. We had recently talked about catching a farm team baseball game, so I thought he was reaching out about that. The message read, "I'd like to see you on your knees." I was completely confused until I realized my wife was still logged into Facebook, and it was meant for her. I was enraged and immediately went through their chat history. It was filled with him making creepy advances, and while she responded with things like, "But I'm married," and "No, I'm married," it sounded more like she was saying no because she felt she had to, not because she meant it. I'm revolted and stunned by what I found. However, since there was no clear indication of anything physical happening, and she was politely rejecting his advances, I can't definitively say she's cheating. When she got home and we put our son to bed, I confronted her about the whole mess. She immediately broke down, sobbing uncontrollably and insisting, "I didn't do anything. I didn't know how to tell you. I was just hoping he would stop." Both of us have dealt with childhood sexual abuse from family friends, and we've spent years in therapy working on our communication skills, especially around comfort, boundaries, and handling unwanted advances. I love her and wanted to trust her claim that Jake was just being a creep, but her failure to tell me about it and her behavior made me suspicious that something more might be going on. I told her I believed her, but I needed to know if I should message him myself to tell him to back off or if she wanted to handle it. Initially, she said she would tell Jake to stop contacting her and that I knew about it, but then she seemed convinced that this would be enough to make him stop. I was furious, but didn't let it show. Knowing she wasn't going to act, I decided I needed to address it myself. This was about my wife being harassed. If that was the case, I needed to end it. And if she was cheating, I needed to confront that too. I messaged Jake, and though he saw the message, he didn't respond. She said I should have let her handle it, but I told her there was no way I was going to stay silent about this. She seemed to get it and agreed in the end that I was right to confront him since she didn't know how to. Things seemed to settle down, but then 3 days later, I came home to find her crying again. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "It's Jake. You should have let me handle it. I messaged him yesterday and he won't talk to me." We revisited the discussion about my role in addressing harassment, and though she gave me a look, just a fleeting glance, it felt like she didn't really see it as harassment. We ended the conversation agreeing that I had handled it as any man would in my position. 2 days later, I came to bed around 2 a.m. after finishing some work and heard her on the phone laughing softly. This struck me as odd. She told me it was her mom calling about our kid's birthday, which I didn't fully buy, but I decided to play dumb to better observe her. The next day, she was crying again, and I'd had enough. She'd been unstable for weeks. When I asked if this was still about Jake, she said she tried to call and apologize for not dealing with it herself, but he still wasn't responding. That was when I lost it. I told her outright that either Jake was harassing her or she was cheating on me, and I caught them. I was lying on the couch that night, feeling like I was just waiting for a solid piece of truth before I decided how to blow this whole thing up. She's going to work in 6 hours. I plan to apologize for my outburst and ask her to sit down with me for a talk tonight. It's Sunday, and our son usually spends the night with my parents every other week. I hate to admit it, but I feel the need to snoop. If I find nothing, we'll discuss what happened, how to address it, and what steps we need to take moving forward. I love her, and the idea of her being harassed by someone who's supposed to care about her is heartbreaking. But if I uncover something incriminating, or if she was in any way complicit, I'm done with this relationship. I don't believe in marriage counseling for infidelity and incest. There's no way I could ever look at her the same again. I barely slept last night. When she got up, I made breakfast and told her that I shouldn't have lost my temper and that we needed to sit down and talk things through later. She agreed, seemingly unbothered, and admitted she'd probably been acting out of line. I told her that dealing with harassment from a family member was especially tough, and she just nodded along. I wasn't planning to snoop, but so many people told me I should check her emails, and not wanting to ignore the advice I sought, I decided to go ahead with it. Even though her behavior this morning gave me fewer reasons to be suspicious, I went through with it anyway. What I found has left me feeling a level of disgust, hatred, and anger I can barely put into words, and a divorce is inevitable. One email was titled, "Yummy," and when I opened it, I saw a picture of her cousin with semen on his face. The emails included him detailing his encounters with random gay men and referenced past sexual encounters they had together. There was even a picture of a strap-on dildo with the caption, "I still have our old friend." I also read some incredibly disturbing exchanges where she was being very dominant and insulting his penis size. It became clear that these interactions dated back at least a year. As I read on, it was obvious they had a regular hookup routine that stopped only after we got married. We had been together for several years before tying the knot. Later, she started using the "I'm married" excuse, but it seemed like just part of his kink, being told he couldn't touch her anymore, which he probably enjoyed. I'm raising her child, and this is how she repays me. I've spent the last 6 years adjusting my work schedule and passing up better-paying jobs just to be there for him. I went outside and sat on the front porch, called my brother, and explained everything to him. I asked him to take my gun for now. I'm not a violent person, but right now I'm torn between wanting to kill him and wanting to harm myself. I won't act on these feelings, but I'm on the edge of a breakdown and don't trust myself to stay rational. After this, I'm packing up my clothes and checking into a hotel. I've printed out all the conversations, emailed myself copies, and plan to dig for more evidence. I bought a pack of cigarettes, even though I quit smoking 4 years ago. Now I have to schedule an appointment at an STD clinic because, according to these revolting emails, a part of his thing is having unprotected sex with other men. I've never used protection with my wife, so I'm facing months of anxiety waiting for AIDS test results. I know his work schedule because I used to work at the same company, so before I check into the hotel and try to pull myself together, I'm thinking of driving over to see his wife with all the evidence. There's no fixing this, no therapy, no hope for reconciliation. I'm done with her and she won't get a dime. Right now, I'm consumed with rage. I'm not sad or depressed. I haven't cried. But there's a burning anger inside me that cigarettes only calm briefly. I can't stand being around her or him, and though I keep saying I'm not violent, the urge to beat the hell out of both of them is overwhelming. All right, I first went to see a lawyer and then headed straight over to Jake's house to talk to his wife. As you might expect, she was heartbroken and revolted by the incestuous details. We sat down together and I filled her in on how Jake had been boasting to my wife about having unprotected sex with random men he met online. I also mentioned the disturbing photos he'd sent my wife including one with semen on his face. She insisted on seeing the evidence despite my warnings, and it left her utterly shattered. Jake, being bisexual, had always been known for chatting up random guys, and she admitted that she allowed him to go out occasionally to see men if he needed to get it out of his system, as she put it. She was under the impression that this hadn't happened in over a year. After that, I stayed at a hotel, where I talked with my mother, brother, and father. My mother-in-law left me numerous voicemails begging me to come and talk, insisting that I must have made a mistake. I didn't answer any of her calls. My wife tried calling me a dozen times, but I ignored her. She didn't send any texts, probably because she knew I was documenting everything and didn't want to give me more evidence. I called her back briefly at the end of the day, saying I'd talk to her the next day. When I eventually returned home, she was a mess, crying and pleading. She tried to hug me, but I told her that was over. She insisted she hadn't cheated, claiming I must have misunderstood and that Jake's wife was spreading rumors because they didn't get along. It was at this moment I realized my wife thought I had heard about the affair from someone else. She didn't know I had uncovered it myself. I then showed her the evidence. The email with the yummy subject line and the disturbing photo of Jake with semen on his face. The picture of the strap-on dildo labeled, "Our Old Friend," and their explicit exchanges where she acted like a dominatrix, making demeaning comments about his penis size and asking him to send pictures after his encounters with other men. It was truly stomach-churning. I'm not exactly a prude. I'm into plenty of kinky stuff myself, so it's not like she was dealing with a sexually uptight husband. But when she realized that I was the one who discovered this and had told Jake's wife, she went from weepy and sad to explosively angry, in a complete frenzy. She yelled, "You should have talked to me first," and accused me of ruining her life by telling Jake's wife, who she claimed would spread everything around. She then insisted she had told Jake to stop texting her inappropriately. That was when I completely lost it. I told her I'd just read a year's worth of texts and emails, and not once did she ever tell him to stop. I called her a degenerate and said we probably both have AIDS now. She broke down further, unable to respond, just crying uncontrollably. Despite everything, I told her we were getting a divorce. I then called her father and asked him to come over because she shouldn't be alone in her state. When I got back to my hotel room, I noticed Jake's wife had been texting me. She'd unearthed a ton of disturbing details about the affair between my wife and Jake. Seeing evidence of their relationship stretching back so far was the final straw for me. I'm usually not one for emotional outbursts, but I ended up sobbing in front of Jake's wife. She was in tears too. After we'd both managed to calm down, I took her to my lawyer, and now one of his colleagues will be handling her divorce. During all this chaos, Jake has been frantically searching for his wife and trying to figure out where she's been reaching out to me. Despite all the overwhelming proof, he's still clinging to the hope that this is all just one massive misunderstanding. It turns out Jake and his wife live in a house owned by his parents, who have taken a hard stance against him. They've kicked him out, apologized profusely to their daughter-in-law, and told her she's welcome to stay with their grandchild for as long as she needs. Essentially, they've disowned him. Jake's father has even convinced himself that Jake was abusing my wife when she was a child, which he believes is why she's acting out now. Since she's his favorite niece, practically a second daughter to him, Jake is now hiding out because his father has essentially put out a hit on him. My father, wanting to support me in this mess, offered to cover my hotel expenses for the week. Today, I laid it all out for my boss. No sugarcoating or filtering. I told him exactly what's been going on and that I need 2 weeks to get my life back on track. He shared how terrible his own divorce was and told me to take all the time I need, assuring me he'd just let everyone at work know I'm dealing with a sick parent or something. That was really kind of him. Now, lying in this hotel room, I can't help but grieve for my stepson, who I might never see again. I was there for him for 6 years, changing his diapers, feeding him in the middle of the night, taking time off work when he was sick, and caring for him after a serious fall that broke his arm so his mother could get some rest. Right now, I feel like I could watch the entire world crumble and wouldn't care one bit, but the thought of never seeing him again is tearing me apart. I need therapy, and it's going to take a lot of talking to work through this. I'm not at risk of ending my life, so that's not a concern. I'm an atheist, so this is the only shot I've got at living. I'm talking to my lawyer later and meeting with Jake's ex again because apparently there's more to uncover. I've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow and then 6 long months of waiting for results. First, the good news. I got my HIV rapid test results back and they were negative. I expected it to take days or even weeks, but I found out right there during the visit. I'll definitely be getting tested again in a few months. And for now, I'm planning to live as though I do have it, just to stay extra cautious. Lila, Jake's wife, that's what I'll be calling her from now on, came along for support. Her own appointment is scheduled for 2 days from now. I had my first extended conversation with my soon-to-be ex-wife. Earlier this week, we had a pretty explosive discussion, and since then, we've only exchanged a few words here and there. I haven't mentioned this before, but I've been calling her at bedtime to say goodnight to our son. Right now, he thinks I'm just working a lot. I plan to tell him the truth soon, or at least something that a 6-year-old can understand. Reconciliation was never an option, and she knew that, so she didn't push for it, which I appreciated. Even though her reasons for all this don't really concern me, they won't change anything. I asked her to be honest about how long the affair had been going on and why, or if there was something I did that drove her to this. She's clearly been crying off and on, but she was relatively composed while talking to me. From her candidness, I can tell she's probably being truthful, and is, in a messed up way, relieved to be talking about it. The long and short of it is that she's the one who started this mess. While she didn't explicitly say it, it's clear she's in love with Jake. And they're not together because, well, obviously. I'm learning now that I've been playing the role of one of those sham marriages, where gay men marry women to appear normal. That's a tough pill to swallow. She claims she loved and still loves me, but I don't buy it, nor does it matter anymore. The past 6 years of my life feel like a lie, just a cover for this nonsense. I'm starting to question if I even know what real romantic love looks like, and that's really messing with me. She looked pained seeing me hurt, but I can't be sure if it was genuine, though at this point, it doesn't really matter. What we focused on was our stepson and how to handle things moving forward. Before I could say much, she said she wouldn't oppose weekend custody and would agree to it in the divorce. I honestly think she's genuinely remorseful about how this affects him. She kept telling me that I am his father, his only dad, and that taking me away from him would be incredibly damaging. We're planning to break the news to him in a few days. Tomorrow, or today, depending on when I post this, I'm taking him to the zoo. I was considering telling him after the trip, but he loves that place, and I don't want him to associate it with his parents' divorce. It's tearing me apart trying to figure out the least damaging way to handle this. I'm hoping to make it a bit more positive, like telling him he'll have a new room in my apartment that he can decorate however he likes and help me set up. I want him to feel like we're a team, and to make this awful situation a bit less painful. We're not rich, so we're just going to keep what we already have in our separate accounts, split the remaining utility bills fairly, and finalize the divorce. We talked about meeting at the courthouse, so I can file for divorce right there in front of her so she can be served immediately. I want this over with as quickly as possible, given that she's agreeing to the one thing I really want, refusing child support with the reasoning that, you didn't make him, and you didn't do this to him. I'm somewhat impressed that she at least wants to make amends. Maybe she just wants weekends off to be with Jake, but as long as I get to stay involved in my son's life, I guess I can consider today a small victory. In other related news, either yesterday or the day before, I went to check on Lila, Jake's soon-to-be ex-wife, to see how she's holding up. When I got there, Jake's parents were unexpectedly present and seemed taken aback by my arrival. I received a heartfelt hug from my wife's aunt, who was in tears and apologizing profusely. It almost got me choked up, too. She had been under the mistaken belief that I'd never see my son again, which really upset her. I didn't know this, but she used to love watching me interact with my son during family gatherings. Essentially, they're letting Lila and the baby stay in their second home for as long as they need to. Jake, on the other hand, is no longer welcome there and is essentially disowned. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but the family seems to have come to the conclusion that Jake abused my wife, which they're interpreting as some sort of Stockholm syndrome. Call me an asshole, but for the sake of my son's stability, I'm going to let them keep this belief. If it means my wife can stay with her family without more conflict in front of my son, then I'll stay silent about it. As expected, Lila is a wreck. She alternates between being okay and breaking down in tears, followed by fits of anger. When the conversation shifts away from the topic at hand, She seems to calm down a bit. Her family is stepping in to support her financially for therapy, and her brother is flying in for a week to be with her. After that, her mom plans to move in with her for a month to help her cope. Today I had the chance to feed her daughter, who's an adorable kid, and managed to ease my anxiety for a bit. Last night my friends and I went to the movies, and I invited Lila to join us. I'm glad she came, but it's also becoming clear to me that I either need to establish some boundaries with Lila or have a frank conversation about what's happening between us. Nothing explicit has been said, but she's been touching me in ways we never did before. I mentioned having a tension headache and a knot in my neck, and she spontaneously began rubbing my shoulders. During my test, when the doctor stepped out of the room, she also held my hand without me asking. It could very well be that I'm just overthinking things because of my rejection, loneliness, and desire to feel valued. But I'm finding myself drawn to her. When I'm not fixating on the awful things happening in my life, I keep imagining her in a romantic way. While it's probably not the healthiest response, feeling something positive is a welcome change from the constant misery and doubt. Maybe I'm misinterpreting her emotional support as something more because I'm so messed up right now, but she's acting toward me the way past girlfriends and even my ex-wife did before we officially got involved. I made a comment about my HIV fears, joking that I couldn't even get a revenge lay without risking harm to someone, and she responded by saying that if I'm infected, she's probably at risk too, considering our partners were involved. In a bizarre way, she said it felt like we'd already been intimate. There were a few moments after that where I thought I saw an invitation, but I decided to change the subject instead. I know I should focus on more important matters, but this situation is a major distraction. Part of me, hopefully the wiser part, understands that starting something with Lila could be disastrous, especially with the divorces looming. But there's a real, physical, and emotional attraction I have for her that seems to be mutual, and I'm afraid that if I don't act, she might think I'm not interested and move on, leaving me without another source of happiness. If anyone has any advice on this mess, I could really use it right now. Putting that aside, I still feel like I'm on the edge of a nervous breakdown, but the divorce seems to be leaning in my favor. I'll still be able to be a dad. And as for Jake, no one really knows where he is, but he was crashing on friends' couches out of state for the first couple of nights. He's called Lila a few times since everything blew up, but that's about it. Today's the day we've decided to tell my son about the changes coming up. Neither of us is looking forward to this conversation, but it's unavoidable. I had a call with my soon-to-be ex last night, and her tone shifted in a way I didn't expect. Initially, she seemed resigned to the divorce and didn't put up a fight, but during our call, she broke down, trying to justify her relationship with her cousin. Now, she's claiming that nothing physical happened between them during our marriage, just some dirty texts. It feels like the storm is about to hit because she's now insisting that she needs my car. She argues that since I work 20 minutes away and she works an hour away, she needs it to get to work, especially if she's going to have our son full-time. Honestly, this old clunker of a car has maybe 2 good years left, so I'm contemplating just handing it over and getting a new one, since I'll need one anyway. But I'm worried that if I start giving in to demands like this now, it'll just set a precedent for the rest of my life. Throughout this, I've also realized that I really don't want to leave my apartment. She mentioned moving in with her parents, and I saw on Facebook that she'll be doing that in a week or so. I'm thinking of waiting until she's gone, and then talking to my landlord. With the trouble he's had filling his units due to COVID, he might be happy to have me stick around. I had breakfast with my dad, who touched on the topic gently, but essentially advised me to hold off on making any commitments that would tie me to my stepson long-term. He's not dismissing my stepson. He's always made time for him, spoiled him on Christmas and birthdays, and even shows up with random toys. He's a proud grandpa. My dad's point was to see how my ex behaves, and if it aligns with what I want in my life. He reminded me that I gave up a chance to go to school to become a family man, and that no one in the family would blame me if I decided I didn't want to be a father anymore. While they all love my son, they don't want to see me fall on my sword because I feel pressured to stick with this crazy family. They'll support me no matter what. Maybe after I start seeing my therapist in 3 weeks, I'll have a different perspective, but for now, I'm determined to remain a father. Afterwards, I took Lila to meet with Jake. I didn't go with her, as I figured it might lead to violence and charges for me, so I just waited at the Sonic drive-thru, listening to music and buying a few drinks to pass the time. When Lila was done, She was visibly shaken. Jake was blaming her for the fact that their relationship didn't end years ago and claimed that the wild stories he'd told about hookups were fabricated as part of some dirty fantasy. If he's to be believed, it was just one guy, his boyfriend, and the rest was made up. It sounds like nonsense, but for some reason, it rings true to me. Lila was devastated, especially seeing how Jake looked like he hadn't slept in days, didn't acknowledge their daughter, and only addressed her when she pressed him. Lila was understandably upset, and I drove her home. I stayed to help her with dinner, making some pasta and teaching her how to make makeshift garlic bread. I found out she sings a French song to her daughter, which was oddly endearing, but seeing that she actually has some of my son's old baby furniture really hammered home just how screwed up this situation is. When I was about to leave, we shared a lingering hug, no words exchanged. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and I rode that small high for the rest of the night. The enormity of everything happening right now is overwhelming. I didn't think it was possible to be filled with such rage and sadness while also experiencing these fleeting moments of warmth and affection. I think I'm entering a phase of wanting to flee. I'm torn between my selfish impulses and rational thoughts, and I'm starting to question if I want to stay in my role as a father. I've always wanted to be a good man, and I believed I had the strength and resolve to raise another man's child. I had that resolve before, but this betrayal has twisted parts of me and changed me so much in a short time that it's becoming hard to keep up a brave face. I've mentioned before that I'm aware of my genetic issues, and because of that, I've always taken precautions not to have a child. I was responsible, careful, and thoughtful, never reckless. On the other hand, my STBX was apparently wild and careless, leading to the birth of our child. So now it feels like I'm going to be tied down because of her reckless behavior. I had no issue stepping up to be a dad, and as you know, I've been proud and happy with the role I've played in my stepson's life. But let's be honest, there's a bleak reality I'm facing. I'm worried that my STBX will use my love for my stepson to manipulate me. I might find myself unable to live where I want or live my life freely because of her demands. If my stepson were my biological child, I'd fight for sole custody and use everything I have to discredit her. But since he's not biologically mine, I don't have those rights. Maybe this is just a temporary feeling, and maybe I'll feel differently tomorrow, but right now, I'm venting raw emotions. If there were a chance for full custody, I'd probably jump at it. This whole situation is tearing me apart, and as I write this, I'm oscillating between wanting to run and hating myself for even thinking that way. Through this hell, Lila has been my constant support. Despite what some commenters might think or even our own doubts, we've decided to be a couple. We're keeping it low-key for now, not making any public moves until we're sure it's working. Since we're both adults living separately, keeping it secret shouldn't be too complicated. Ironically, we're behaving like we're having an affair ourselves. I've shared my struggles as a divorced stepdad with her, and she's given me her perspective. She said that if she were in my position, she'd try to distance herself from this chaotic family, given that I have the option to. She lamented that she'll be stuck dealing with Jake and my STBX for the foreseeable future. Her advice, which aligns with my own thoughts, is to hold off on any rash decisions until I've talked with my therapist in 2 weeks. When I returned to my apartment today, I was shocked by how much of my ex's stuff had already been moved out. It was a bit depressing to see the place looking so empty, but it was also a relief to know she's leaving without putting up a fight. My son is with his grandparents, so my ex and I had a chance to sit down for coffee and discuss how to divide our mutual belongings. The conversation was polite, considering the circumstances. For Lila's sake, I asked if Jake had been in touch because he's been MIA for the past 3 days and hasn't left Lila anything for essentials like diapers and food. Jake's family is helping her, and I'm doing what I can. My ex showed me her phone with 4 missed calls and texts from Jake wanting to talk. She tried to convince him to face the family, as he'll have to eventually, but from what she said, he might be planning to run. Then my STBX asked how Lila is holding up and mentioned hearing from her aunt that I've been around a lot. I explained that Lila and I are supporting each other through this ordeal and that she's understandably pretty shaken. In response, my ex bluntly said, "Whatever you're doing with her is none of my business, but I'm not stupid. It's pretty rich to be indirectly accused of an affair by the woman who cheated on me." I wanted to lash out, but I didn't want to jeopardize the divorce process, so I redirected the conversation back to dividing our belongings. I'm down a TV, but at least she took those ugly couches. Thank God I didn't want to be the one hauling them out to the curb. A few weeks later, I filed for divorce. I went to the courthouse, spoke with the clerk, and filled out the necessary paperwork. My STBX and I decided to forego lawyers and mediation in an effort to expedite the process. We agreed on a division of assets and other matters ourselves. We tried to have her served immediately after submitting the paperwork to avoid a process server going to her home or work. I'm usually pretty level-headed, and so is my STBX, which is surprising given how the situation has unfolded. She seemed almost as eager as I was to get this over with. However, things didn't go as planned. It turns out she couldn't be served in the manner we hoped, so I had to drive her back to her parents' place. During the drive, I asked her how she was holding up despite everything. Her calm facade cracked a bit, and through tears, she admitted that she's coping fine with me gone, but she feels guilty when my stepson asks for me or gets upset about my absence. She confessed that she had been unhappy in our marriage long before we even got married. She didn't resent or hate me, she just fell out of love. Our sex life had been a constant issue. Despite our active and sexual natures, we weren't on the same page. I prefer to pursue, whereas she likes to pursue, and we struggled to reconcile our differing desires. We had several discussions about it and even tried swapping roles for a time, but it led to me compromising my own needs while she wasn't receptive to my requests. At one point in our relationship, we had a female live-in roommate we both found attractive. Under strict guidelines, she became someone we had frequent encounters with. This arrangement temporarily alleviated some of our issues, allowing us to function well as a team, especially in terms of finances and parenting. We shared many interests and were a great team, but the underlying sexual problems remained. When this third person moved out to pursue a relationship of her own, the tension resurfaced. It was around this time that Jake and Lila moved into Jake's parents' second home. They had been living in her home state until Jake lost his job. According to my STBX, it was then that Jake reconnected with her. They initially met up as cousins, but soon after, she started confiding her frustrations about our sex life to him. This eventually led to an affair. They would only meet during family gatherings and use excuses to disappear, which explains some of the times I couldn't find her. We got married around this time, so it's possible that the affair started right around my wedding. At this point, I really didn't want to hear any more from my STBX, but she mentioned that she's now seeing a therapist and wants to use me as a sort of confessional. Everything about their affair was news to me, and while it's helpful to know the truth, it feels pointless to hear details that don't directly affect my life. She also revealed that the out-of-state aunt she cried over for a week was actually mourning after Lila called her with the news of her pregnancy. The thought of comforting my wife while she was grieving for another man is more painful now than discovering the texts. This was after a weekend where I had 2 whole days alone with my stepson. We had a fantastic time playing Minecraft together and enjoying typical dad activities like playing catch. It was the longest time we've spent together since the initial discovery. He's 6, loves Minecraft, and I got a console version so we could play split screen. He told me he misses me but enjoys his time with his grandparents, who spoil him. After such a great weekend, I felt positive about staying in his life. But learning all this new information from my STBX has made it harder to stay focused. The idea of having to be around her voluntarily for the rest of my life seems unbearable. As a parent, I know I should put aside my own feelings for my child's sake, but the thought of giving up is increasingly tempting. More than the betrayal or the loss of my wife, this breaks my heart. I'll see him again Friday night and hope I can keep pushing through. On the Lila front, Jake has stopped calling or taking her calls for the past 4 days. He's moved in with his boyfriend, which was a surprise to both of us. Lila plans to file for divorce before the week is over and will be considering her next steps. Her brother will arrive in 2 days to stay with her for a week. With Jake's parents' approval, we've changed the locks on her house as a precaution. There are rumors he's involved with drugs. We installed a new chain and a deadbolt. While he's never been violent, his sudden disappearance and the rumors made it seem safer to take these measures. As for my relationship with Lila, we're quietly exploring a romantic connection. We both acknowledge that our feelings might be influenced by our trauma and may not be entirely lasting, but I can't deny how strongly I feel about her. The physical attraction is unlike anything I've experienced before, and she tells me the feelings are mutual. She's come by my work a couple of times this week to bring me dinner she made, which is one of the sweetest gestures anyone has done for me. Once again, it feels like life is beating me down, while simultaneously offering moments of unexpected joy. Lila's life has been a nightmare for the past 4 days. Her brother arrived earlier in the week, and she was deeply relieved to finally have family support. When she introduced me as the ex-husband of Jake's AP and mentioned that we'd been supporting each other through this, her brother quickly figured out that we were seeing each other. He took me aside, expressing concern that she might be jumping into a new relationship too soon. I assured him that we're taking things slowly and being cautious because of the circumstances. I explained that I respect his sister and that our relationship started because we both needed support after the affair. I also told him that if they felt it was best for her to return home, I wouldn't stand in the way. Her recovery and her daughter's well-being should come first. After that, he and I got along as well as could be expected. Just as things seemed to be looking up, Lila received a call from the hospital. Jake is in the ICU. The details are still unclear, but he ingested a dangerous amount of antifreeze. Considering the turmoil and shame from his affair being exposed, suicide seems plausible, but using antifreeze is an unusual method. Given the rumors about him getting into drugs, accidental poisoning can't be ruled out. Lila is now feeling overwhelming guilt over this, though it's unwarranted. Jake's parents, who had previously condemned him, are now asking Lila if she would consider reconciling with him. She told me she agreed to consider it, not because she wants to, but to avoid causing them more pain. As of now, Jake has been in the ICU for 5 days. There are concerns about crystal deposits in his brain and possible edema. He had a heart attack during his initial treatment, and his prognosis isn't good. Lila told me that even if he survives, the brain damage he sustained will likely have severe, lifelong effects. I don't feel pity for him. I don't wish death or suffering on anyone, but Jake played a part in ruining my marriage, taking a father away from his son, and causing tremendous pain all around. I'm here for Lila, supporting her as she decides what to do next. If she chooses to be with me, I'm open to that. If she wants to return south to be with her family, I fully support that as well. As for my ex, I hear she's now seeing someone new. This probably means there were multiple people involved, which is a hard truth to face. It makes me question how oblivious I was during our marriage. Maybe I was just too blind to see what was really happening. This realization is part of why I'm choosing not to stay in my stepson's life. I can't bear the thought of watching my ex's poor decisions continue to impact his life negatively. I hope she eventually makes some positive changes, but I have serious doubts. If 6 years of marriage didn't make her change, I'm not convinced therapy will. I still don't understand what went wrong. I was a good listener, a provider, I took care of myself, and I did my best to make her feel loved and wanted. I raised her child, helped her family with home renovations, and had a great relationship with her parents. Her father and I would go out for beers and watch games together, independent of her, so there was no friction there. My family adored her and her son from day one. Yes, we had some sexual issues, but it wasn't a sexless marriage. We could have communicated better about our needs, but I thought our relationship was strong enough to handle that. It turns out, though, there was no real relationship at all, just an illusion. I wish I had something more positive to end on, but this will be my final update. If you're curious about my plans for the future, here are the 2 main options I'm considering, both contingent on what happens with Jake. Option 1. If Lila decides to move back to her home state once this is all over, I'll support her decision and say goodbye. No offense to that state, but I don't see a future for myself there. If she wants me to come with her, we'll have a discussion, and I might look into the area to see if my initial impression was off. Lila makes me happy and feels like what a loving partner should be. I won't tell her how much she means to me because I want her decisions to be based on what's best for her and her daughter, not influenced by my feelings. If during our discussion she expresses love and a desire to try a future together, I'll share my feelings, and we'll decide how to move forward. If Jake doesn't pull through, we'll both be leaving the state anyway. Option 2. If Lila and I don't continue our relationship, the path is clearer. I have friends and family on the West Coast that I've missed, and my career there offers more opportunities for advancement. I could rediscover myself, go surfing again, stay in shape, and find someone who truly loves me. The possibilities are endless. I've mentioned this to Lila, and she's expressed some interest in moving west, since she's never been out there. If our relationship is strong, I'd be open to dating her for a few months before making that move. Option 3. Another possibility is staying here and climbing the career ladder. As a quality control floor supervisor in manufacturing, many of my colleagues have moved up to corporate positions, and I could have been in their shoes if not for my family commitments. Now that those constraints are lifted, I could focus on advancing in my career, finding a new girlfriend, or, if Lila remains here, pursuing a lasting relationship with her. I'm also exploring advancements related to my disorder to see if there are now options for having my own children without passing on my condition. It's been over a decade since I last looked into it, so there may be new developments.